Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. This was supposed to be our family's trip to the apple orchard, but my family has been passing around a little 24-hour bug for the last couple of weeks, and my husband came home from work on Friday with a fever, so we stayed home and we will try again next week with the apple orchard. There's always plenty to do around the homestead, so we're going to have a really great productive day instead. My daughter Amaris is kind of our chicken whisperer, and she loves collecting eggs in the morning. We did not realize the chickens were still laying in these old nesting boxes. We had 43 eggs this morning. First up on my list for today was to clean out our big freezer and get it moved out to the deck so it can defrost. Unfortunately, we still had far more in our small freezer than I realized, and there was no way the contents of the big freezer would fit in the small freezer. So I switched gears to emptying the small freezer into the big freezer. I also took out quite a bit of meat that I'm going to go ahead and cook and pressure can to put in the pantry. I also took out meat for the next week. We will make meatballs with some of them. We'll have kielbasa and cabbage for dinner one night. Then I was able to fit the remainder of what was in the small freezer into the bins in the large freezer. Now, I did take up every nook and cranny of the large freezer, the door space in between the bins. That freezer is packed, and it feels pretty good going into the winter knowing that we still have a ton of meat in here. Thoroughly going through both freezers today really helped me to take inventory and realize where I need to be using up what we have. And I'm going to be switching out my core menu a bit so that I make sure we're going through this red meat a little more often than we currently do. About a month after we bought this freezer last year, the door was left open just a hair, but it was enough for warm air to get in, all this frost built up, and about 10 pounds of venison partially defrosted. So that's why there's blood mixed in. We had to cook that up, and now it's time to defrost it and get this thing cleaned up. If I had to choose one fast food breakfast recipe to replicate, it would be the bacon and Gruyere sous vide egg bites at Starbucks. They are absolutely delicious. They're like a little breakfast cloud. They're so good, and I know putting them in the oven is not going to get the same exact effect, but if I can get close to that, it'll be a win. So if you are familiar with Becky at Acre Homestead, she is adorable. I love her channel. If you don't follow her, go check her out and tell her that I sent you. She followed this copycat recipe in one of her most recent videos, and the finished product looked really delicious. I figured egg and cheese and bacon, you really can't go wrong. This will be an easy breakfast for my kids and my husband to pull from the fridge and just pop it in the microwave or the oven. It helped me to use up some of the 43 eggs that we collected this morning, and I also had this cooked bacon already in the freezer. I also put a simmer pot on the stove. These were some sliced apples that were on the verge of going bad, some orange peels, cinnamon sticks, and cloves, and it smelled amazing all morning while I worked in the kitchen. Now I'm going to use up some of our overripe bananas. If you'd like this recipe, just pause the video and take a screenshot. I mix my wet ingredients together first, I mix my dry ingredients separately, and then I combine them. I bake on 350 until the muffins are brown on top, or probably close to an hour for a loaf. The first thing I'm doing is simply peeling all of these bananas. I will put the peels in our compost pile. The kids typically eat through all of our bananas before they become overripe, so it's really a treat when I've purchased too many bananas and they haven't been eaten before they start getting ripe, and we're able to set them aside for banana bread. I ended up doubling the recipe that I showed you before, and that makes about 4 dozen muffins. That will get my kids through the next couple mornings for breakfast, and I might even go ahead and stick some in 2 different gallon bags and stick them in the freezer. They'll probably get tired of them before we run out. I don't know why, but I think if there was one chore that I had to avoid for the rest of my life, it would be hand washing muffin pans. They're just a pain. I have used paper muffin cups for as long as I can remember, and I make sure if I drip any batter onto the pans, I wipe it nice and clean before it goes in the oven, so I never have a big mess to clean up. The egg bites came out beautifully. They tasted wonderful, and I think my kids ate close to a dozen of them before they even cooled. The banana muffins turned out beautifully. The whole downstairs smelled amazing, and I set some softened butter out so all the kids could enjoy them while they were warm. If you've been around since the spring, you know this year I had the largest fenced vegetable garden that I've ever had. It was about 2,000 square feet, and we had more produce than we've ever produced on our homestead. It was really exciting. The garden brings me so much joy, even though it is a lot of work. Now, my work schedule this summer was busier than it's ever been, and I just didn't have time to tend the garden like I normally do. Unfortunately, that meant by the time all of my veggies got huge and the rains came toward the end of June, the weeds completely took over, and this is the state of my garden now. Once all of our vegetables were finished producing, I just let it go. I didn't have it in me. I was so overwhelmed by the amount of weeds. So we are actually about to let our chickens into this fenced-in area for all of winter to peck around and scratch and hopefully eat all the squash bugs. I learned my lesson this year. I will be mulching much more heavily next year, and I'm also going to be hiring someone part-time to take over some of my outside work during harvest season. If you're new here, 6 of my 8 children still live at home, and we produce a lot of laundry. Almost all of my children do their own laundry, but I take a lot of pleasure in hanging it out on the clothesline to dry. There's nothing like the smell of line-dried laundry, and it also saves a ton of money on our electric bill if we use the clothesline as often as possible. No matter how often I use the cleaning cycle in our water-efficient washer, I always end up with this gross residue on our dark pants, whether it's black or navy blue. I end up having to go back with a wet washcloth to scrub this off. I'd really like to go back to a standard washer that actually fills the tub with water. Within just a few hours, the freezer was completely defrosted and dried out. I cleaned it up really well, and now it is back in the laundry room. A few of you have asked from previous pantry videos if I've ever tried this hand crank grain mill. I purchased it about 1.5 years ago on Amazon, and I've never used it. So I decided to get it out and see if it's any good. The brand is Roots and Branches. I'll leave a link in the description below in case you're interested. I got it all set up and hooked to the side of my island, and I was a little bit concerned about whether it would stay put on the slippery granite. Now, I had to find a shallow bowl to catch the flour because of the way this mill is designed. You can see from this time lapse that I had to change positions and arms and try all different things because this was 10 minutes of hard work. I was sweating, my face was all red, and my kids found it quite funny that I was getting such a workout. Overall, I would give this a 5-star review. It took me 10 minutes to mill 2 cups of whole wheat, and it produced a beautiful fine flour. It definitely makes you appreciate the amount of work it took for Ma and Pa Ingalls to make a loaf of bread back in the 1800s. I did get my Nutrimill out to mill the rest of the wheat that I needed to make bread. After a beautiful day of hard work, my mother-in-law suggested that we have a campfire and roast hot dogs and marshmallows. My kids love to sit around the fire and listen to stories from my husband and my mother-in-law. It was a wonderful way to end our day. I really like to get all of my laundry folded and put away on Saturdays so I can have a true Sabbath rest on Sundays and not have any housework hanging over my head. So I took 5 to 10 minutes to fold and put this last little load away that had been on the clothesline. When I shook out the last kitchen towel, something attached to my finger and I flung it across the room and realized a few minutes later it was this massive carpenter bee. It doesn't look big in this little video, but I assure you it was half the size of my thumb. I quickly grabbed him and relocated him outside. My bed was cleared off, and I had finally earned a hot bath. Thanks for hanging out with me. See you next time.